I would love to talk a little bit about beating the broken cookie effect a little bit. But before we get there, there's another kind of like level of Patty I want to share with everyone, because another thing that stood out inside of the book that I love so much is you also had a challenging but fruitful experience of growing a business while being a single mom, and you had a single goal as being a mom of raising good human beings. So I would love for you to share a little bit about that, and I think that actually ties directly into what you were talking about, the broken cookie effect, but just add a little bit of color about of your experience growing your business and raising good human beings.
Sure. I'm going to step back just a little bit to talk about a concept that I've also been able to put words to, and that's called the good girl's dilemma. Mm. I grew up as a good girl. I still am a good girl, although I like to think I'm a good girl with a lot of awareness, maybe an ex-good girl. But, a good girl grows up and does what she's, quote, supposed to do. I was supposed to grow up, get my education, get married, have kids, raise my family. If I had a career, that was kind of a bonus, but it really wasn't expected. And whereas my brothers, there's a lot of pressure put on them because they were raised to be breadwinners. So I did all the things I was supposed to do. And all of a sudden, I'm 35 years old. I have 3 little kids at home. My youngest was 2. And I have a surprise divorce. And my world turned upside down. At that time, I had a business as a political consultant and a lobbyist. I loved it. It was fascinating, and I'd never do it again. And the political arena is as ugly as you can imagine it is, or you might even know that it is. And I was one of very few female lobbyists. There was a lot of sexual discrimination and harassment. And so it was only something I could tolerate for a particular period of time. I had that business for about 8 years. The biggest challenge I had was that my revenue was tied to the election cycle. So when I was doing political consulting and there was an election coming up, the fees were great, right? The pay was good. The candidates would seek me out, and I did a lot of campaign strategy and training, especially communications training. And so although I loved it, I needed to even out my revenue. And if there were resources to help me figure out how to do that, I didn't know where to find those resources, and I didn't know who to trust. Mm-hmm. And again, in the political arena, you don't trust anybody. So that was a kind of a built-in problem. And I figured out that if I added lobbying, which I was doing informally, if I made it more formal, then I would have income year-round. So the trade-off for adding the lobbying was travel. And once I realized that I was headed towards a divorce, I had to stop the travel because I knew that I needed to stabilize things for my kids. Mm-hmm. So that was a huge turning point for me, making the decision to close my business and get a job because I needed health insurance and I needed a steady paycheck and I needed to be home. Mm-hmm. So that goes back to what you were saying about stabilizing things for my kids and raising good human beings. And as long as I kept that in perspective, everything else could be dealt with, right? If we were healthy and stable, everything else could be dealt with. I was concerned that I would be on my own financially, logistically, emotionally, and I was. And so that gave me very much focus and purpose. And I had in this interim plan, I worked for an international school, first as director of development, handling fundraising, public relations, and marketing, and then became director of operations. Was there for almost 9 years. And that was wonderful because it did exactly what I needed it to do in terms of stabilizing things for my family. And it was also a wonderful environment. I'm around kids and their families, and it was a wonderful environment. and had a lot of responsibility and learned a ton. And while I was there, I was planning the block group, which I started in 2006. And so that window allowed my kids to get older and more independent. It allowed me to stabilize things and then to have some savings so that I could start my company. So that was the strategy that I used. It worked really well. And it was a very difficult time for me. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but I had to be there to get here. And here is fabulous.